So, great. Frank.
Bernd.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Wow, special. So today it's June the 30th, the last one. Let's have some fun at Takt.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, first I want to start with your saxophone.
Mm-hmm.
Your saxophone player at the first, right?
So yeah, I mean, as a kid, I learned saxophone, and that was probably my first real pleasure with playing music. Yeah.
Okay. Well, playing saxophone means that you create a sound through air, metal, and wood,
Mm-hmm.
right? Why is the saxophone your instrument? And do you always think about that technique, that there's air involved and metal and wood?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just an accident, really, that I ended up playing saxophone. I mean, as a child, I think I liked the color or the shape or some arbitrary quality of the saxophone that had nothing to do with music that I was necessarily familiar with. Once I got started playing the saxophone, then I started investigating who plays the saxophone and listening to jazz, and came to the music that I now treasure after I really started taking lessons as a child. The other part of your question, I would say that I don't try consciously to think of the saxophone as some kind of model for making music or for sound, but I've spent so much time playing saxophone that it's necessarily part of my body, and when I imagine sound, that imagination is inevitably linked to thousands of hours of making sound with the instrument and with my body. So I would say yes, it does have something to do with the way I imagine sound and the way I create sound.
Okay. And how did the music enter your life, even as a professional, to make that switch somehow, to realize, okay, music is it for me, I will go really for it and make some money from it?
My mother was a musician, is a musician. She studied music in college and taught me piano. Probably my first music lessons were as a very small child from my mother. And so there was music in the house, and my mother was playing Chopin and Beethoven on the piano. And my parents had a pretty varied record collection, which I listened to quite a bit. So in school, I fell in love with the jazz band as soon as I was old enough to join that group. And I would say it took a long time before I really thought of music as a profession, because I always knew how difficult it was for musicians to make a living. So in college I was studying music, but I was also studying mathematics and some other things, studying philosophy. And so I would say over time I became more and more invested in making life as a musician.
Okay, good. Well, you are from Brunswick.
Brunswick, Maine.
Yes. That reminded me directly when I saw that of that record label in the 40s and 50s, because my parents had records when I was a child, and we also had Brunswick music in our place. How does your life look like in Brunswick? How far are you away from the big stuff happening in the States? And do you miss the big things happening around, like maybe Chicago, New York, or San Francisco, or Seattle?
Yes. Well, Brunswick's a very small town on the coast of Maine. A population of about 10,000, 10 or 12,000. I teach at a small liberal arts college, so I'm teaching at the university level in a small music department. And the school has active cultural community and concert series and regular schedule of speakers, a rich intellectual life. So in that regard, there's lots of cultural stimulation around, but it's all inside of this small community. About 30 kilometers away is the city of Portland, which is the biggest city in my state. It has a population of about 70,000, so it's also a small city. And there's a community of musicians there. There's this one club that regularly has jazz. But it's very different than being near a big city like New York or Boston. Boston is about a 2.5-hour drive on the highway from where I live. So it's not convenient. If I go down to a concert in Boston, it usually means staying overnight in a hotel. I stay very busy in this community, and it's a beautiful place to live. I'm near the ocean. There's lots of natural beauty, and it's a warm community. I enjoy my neighbors and my small town and so on. But I do miss the stimulation of a large city. And oftentimes in the summers when I'm not teaching, my wife and I travel to a large city and take in some of the cultural events.
Okay, and that's enough for stimulation?
Well, it's a compromise that I've come to because I have a wonderful job. I'm teaching great students, and my job affords me time to do my creative work. I'm encouraged to do my creative work. So it's just one of the compromises that's necessary to have the quality of life that I enjoy.
Okay, great. Well, you are a teacher, you told already, and a composer and an artist. Well, we see something here that is artistic work from you. But this is computer generating, right? So you work with drawings and animation as well. Can you please explain that, the way you work, and also the relationship inside with sound?
So, in my compositions for music, I often use the computer. And I'm very much interested in generative systems and composing processes that make sound. So out of that practice came the practice of making drawings and animations, and the kind of periodic functions that make up sound, repeating waveforms. I'm using to generate drawings as well. So systems that have sort of periodic structures over time, I'm using to leave traces on the paper. Okay.
So in a way you open the sound wave and put them on paper.
Something like that. I mean, it's an analogy. It's not literal, but absolutely. So the kind of waveforms that you would use in a synthesizer, like triangle waves and sine waves and so on, and the idea of modulating those waves or filtering those waves are the same processes I'm using to generate drawings.
Good. And can you go a little bit deeper into the system, how you work with your drawings? We see this drawing, but you also made other drawings. You have a lot of new work here in Berlin. Can you explain a little bit your ideas behind that?
Sure. Well, as I said before, I'm very interested in composing systems, so I don't usually start with an imagined idea of how I want things to look in the end. I'm much more interested in developing some kind of complex system that has emergent behavior that evolves patterns that surprise me, unexpected patterns.
Wow, that sounds cool. Really, it's also refreshing in a way, right?
So it's a kind of exploration of randomness and chaos, but randomness and chaos that out of that randomness precipitates connections, patterns, things that we can make sense of or that can matter or signify in some way. So that interests me a lot, and if I can make a system that behaves like that, and it leaves traces in sound or traces on the paper, then I think I can find something in those traces to enjoy. So that's sort of my working process, is to chase after interesting systems and see what traces they leave.
Yeah.
So in this piece, for example, in this series of pieces, I simulate an articulated arm in three-dimensional space, and the arm is kind of moving and drawing in 3 dimensions.
Okay.
And the movement at the joints of the arm, the movement in each joint is described by 2 angles, and those angles are controlled by periodic wave functions. So, and those periodic wave functions are sometimes frequency modulated or amplitude modulated. Maybe the range of motion is modulated somehow, and I watch how the drawing evolves over time from this dance that is the result of these modulated wave functions moving an arm in space.
Okay, cool. That sounds great. Thank you for that. Well, you are here in Berlin to do your sabbatical year, you told me. What does this mean, in a way?
So, my university has a very generous policy of after you've taught for a number of years, you're allowed a research year where you're encouraged to take a leave of absence from your teaching responsibilities and pursue your research work or your creative work, so that when you return to teaching, you come back with new ideas, refreshed, and so I'm here in Berlin on leave of absence from my school to compose, to create artwork.
Yeah, but what makes you to choose Takt? Why is it Takt you came? Yeah.
Well, I knew I wanted to come to Berlin because I'm interested in the scene in Berlin, but also my partner who is also a teacher at the same institution, and she's on her sabbatical year, and she's doing research at a laboratory in Berlin. So I wanted to be in the same place. So I started looking for residencies in Berlin and researching them. Takt looked like a good place. It had interesting programming as far as exploring galleries in Berlin, having a series of speakers come in and interact with the residents, and that the residents were active in a variety of media. They weren't just painters or just writers. So all those things. Also, I wanted right from the beginning to establish a community in Berlin, because it's very hard when you show up at a new place. It takes a long time to meet people, and for me, the stimulation of other creative people is just very important to my happiness and to my productivity. I need to be meeting other artists.
Yeah, of course. I think this is something for everyone, right? Yeah. What were your expectations before you came here? What did you had ideas where to go, what to do, and what did you get them then afterwards? I mean, you are living in 1 month, something like that. Did you learn something new here? What happened here? What are your likes, but maybe you also hate something? What you discovered here? I don't know.
Well, I had visited Berlin a couple of times previous to this year, so I sort of knew already that Berlin had a lot to offer, both for music and for artwork. And living in Berlin, I've been surprised at just how rich the cultural life of Berlin is. It's really a wonderful place to live. The quality of life here is very good, and the variety of music and art is astounding. So I would say every week I'm discovering new places to go, new musicians and artists, and I'm learning new things all the time, just by soaking up all this great stuff that's happening. And Berlin has this wonderful history, I mean, complicated history of divided city, reunited, and all the urgent social concerns of our time. Berlin has a history that speaks to all the concerns that are just pressing on us all over the world. But here we're kind of at the crossroads of East and West. We're in a multicultural city that's dealing with a difficult past and with the issues of unification and welcoming refugees. So that's interesting, and that's informing the artists here. So the artists here are talking about that in their conversation and in their work. So this is an important place to be.
Yeah. Is there something specific you learned here? Something that made you richer in a way?
Specific. Yeah, that's very difficult to thematize, I think. My artwork has taken a lot of new turns. If there's what specifically in Berlin led me to those new places, that's very hard to say. This experience here is so complex and rich that it's not like a particular person showed me a particular thing.
You just followed a little bit your feelings, your intuition, and went. You just did it. Is this something new, maybe? Something that was created through your way to live here? That's different than living in the United States.
Boy, I think it's partly the luxury of just being immersed in a community of artists full time without the responsibilities of teaching. I'm making work all day, every day. So, and I'm discussing work with other artists and musicians. So that's something I can't do at home.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mean, that said, at home I'm influenced by my teaching, for sure. Like, I wouldn't be doing visual art if I wasn't a teacher, because I started working visually by creating demonstrations for my media students, to show them that the same processes that we're using to create music could be used to animate visuals and so on. And by making those demonstrations and interacting with students' ideas, that led me in a completely new path. So I don't want to suggest that teaching is some kind of impoverished situation that's stealing creative opportunities from me. Not at all. But the situations here is different. And also living in a multicultural city with a vibrant urban life. And, not just art, but the politics and the commerce of the city and the energy of the city. It's just very important.
Yeah. Well, you will have your first exhibition ever here in Takt very soon. How does this feel, and how does it feel to see your prints becoming a new life in a new space? I mean, when you make it and you print it at home, it's something you create at home or in your studio, and now you have to bring it out. You have to show them the world in a way. How does this feel? And do you feel comfortable in the space that Takt offers you?
Yes, I feel comfortable in the space of Takt. For one thing, Takt is connected to a generous and intelligent community of artists and people who take art seriously. So, and I can't ask for a better audience than that. So I think I'll have people looking at the show with intelligence and with generosity. So that's a wonderful, gratifying thing for an artist. I think it's important, it's going to be very important to me to have a first show. So far I've been just showing art to close friends of mine, and you're an artist. I think you can understand that even to us, the art takes on different meaning when we're in the presence of other people looking at the art. And it changes depending on who's with us looking at the artwork. So I think opening up my work to a new group of observers is going to help me understand my own work more deeply.